German masqueraders in the United States are at it again, trying to slander me to turn all non white people against me by twisting what recently I said. I try and nail their lies as soon as I learn about them so that their mischief does not cause lasting harm. Here is the recent attempt and my clarification. Hello, friends. This is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. The Bible points out Satan's nature to us. He is a murderer and a diabolical liar, as stated in John 8, verse 44, which says, "You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." So he's the one who deceives the whole world, as stated in Revelation 12, verse 9, and accuses Christians or people in general before God day and night in verse 10 of Revelation 12. Germans obey Satan and take their guidance from him. They have a nature exactly like that of the devil, which God has summarized succinctly in the prophet Nahum's book, chapter 3, verse 1 and 19. Woe to the bloody city! Here, God uses Nineveh, ancient Assyria's capital city, to represent the character of the modern Germans who are descendants of the ancient Assyrians. Woe to the bloody city! That means they are full of blood, which means they are violent people, uh, murderers like Satan the devil. It is all full of lies and robbery. Again, there is no truth in them like in Satan the devil. The prey departs not. They are always victimizing somebody or the other, just like Satan does, seeking whom he may devour. And then verse 19, "From whom has not your wickedness passed continually?" There is no one, no nation or people who is going to escape their being victimized by them. Germans twist people's words, use innuendo or outright lies to cast aspersions on people to damage their reputation or turn others into their enemies, just as Satan does. They're always seeking to harm or destroy other people unless they can use them for their own purposes. Since I have been exposing German wickedness over the past 4 years, they seek to destroy me and turn people into my enemies and encourage them to destroy me. They will use any means to accomplish their goal, including twisting my words to slander me. That's what the latest incident is about, for which I would like to set the record straight. I could be using my time to do something more useful, but if this slander is not handled head on, it can cause great harm to the work I'm doing. That's why I'm offering this clarification. A few days ago, in my business school WhatsApp group, a member posted a picture of a man holding a poster at some sort of rally, uh, uh, which was stated, "We were all humans until race disconnected us, religion separated us, politics divided us, and wealth classified us." My response to the post was as follows. I have added some additional comments to clarify my response. So here was my response. How true. But let me bring in a little religion here to show that God's ultimate purpose is to eliminate these divisions and, in some cases, bridge them. In God's 1,000-year kingdom, there will be only one religion. So that division based on religion will be gone forever. Since it's God's kingdom, there will be no politics. So those divisions, politics dividing us, will be gone. Also, there will be universal prosperity. That does not mean that some will not be richer than others, but it won't matter, as everyone will be able to live well, able to afford wine and good healthy food, have land and a house to live in. Therefore, wealth divisions will be gone. There will be race, but nations will be separated by race even in God's kingdom. However, there will be free interaction through international travel and trade. Nations from all over the world will also be required to attend the annual Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, so that means more interaction. But then God's purpose is to give eternal life to everyone, to as His sons and daughters, to all those who choose to obey His laws. Most of humanity will do that. As immortal beings with all having the same body like that of Jesus Christ, as mentioned in 1 John chapter 3 verse 2, race divisions will be gone. That's what humanity was when God created Adam and Eve as white human beings. Again, I wrote, this is a very interesting observation, but God has a plan to bring everything full circle. With that vision always in mind, I find it easier to deal with all of life's trials. So that's what I posted in response to the message in the WhatsApp group. Now, I deliver an approximately 1 hour long weekly message every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. USA Eastern Standard Time. I read the messages from my computer in English, but they are made available to every human being on earth in his or her own language by God's angels. You can hear them by tuning in your ear to listen, and you will hear them. Now, recently, I've been running a series of messages on why God created the non white races. Last Saturday, on January 5, 2025, I added some information on why God Himself caused divisions in humanity along racial lines. That's what German masqueraders have twisted to turn non white people against me and perhaps even against the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel or UBI nations. That's what I would like to clarify. What I'm going to state is nothing new. I've been stating the truth about it from ancient history for many years so that different people can learn valuable lessons about what God is doing with humanity and His plan for them. I realized that German masqueraders were twisting my words when African Americans living around me started shouting and making comments which told me something had gone wrong. The only thing that could have gone wrong is masqueraders twisting my words to slander me to non white people, to turn them against me and UBI nations. So I stated the following in my weekly message last week. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God, He let them develop their own. He let man develop his own civilization, cut off from Him. After Cain murdered his righteous brother Abel, God separated Cain from Adam's other children. This division was made in the territory their descendants occupied, meaning Cain was told to move away from his father's other children. So that was how they were divided. However, after a century and a half of wandering the earth, Cain came and started living near Adam's other children, who allowed it and suffered the consequences in having to endure the looting, pillage, imposition of tribute, violence, and war brought on by Cain and his descendants. So, this is what I wrote, but here's my comment. If God had not separated Cain from Adam's other children, as he had murdered Abel, he would have murdered more people. He probably would not have left anyone who followed God. That's why God separated him. Then continuing, God then used another basis for dividing Cain's descendants from the other descendants of Adam and Seth with whom God worked. That basis was to cause non white races to originate in the line of Cain. God's purpose was to show that obeying His laws produces happiness, joy, and abundance, and every good gift, including good looks, whereas the way of lawlessness, as practiced by Cain and his descendants, produces pain, suffering, and anguish, leading to violence, war, and bloodshed. Then here is the comment I'm adding. Non white people were born in Cain's line as punishment because they had started deifying themselves as gods and demanded that other people worship them. God took away some of their beauty so that they would be less attractive to the white descendants of the line of Seth. Then Cain's descendants, particularly in the line of Lamech, began to make material progress in addition to using brute force to rule over other people. Developments in metallurgy and production of metals and alloys led to Lamech's descendants producing superior weapons which they used to conquer other people, rule over them, and impose tribute and taxes over them. Material wealth also led Seth's descendants to interact with them, leading to interracial marriages voluntarily as well as forcibly. A result was global violence and bloodshed, which led God to drown that world in a global flood. After the flood, God again separated the races by giving Noah a colonization plan in which tribes of different races would populate different parts of the earth. God's purpose was to prevent the kind of violence and bloodshed that took place before the flood. Again, God's purpose was to let humanity learn by experience that those who obey His laws prosper, learn by experience that those who obey His laws prosper and live happier lives, and those who disobey His laws live in misery. However, a slight majority of humanity of all races rebelled against God's colonization plan, went to the land of Shinar in modern Iraq, and began building their own civilization. They began to practice Cain's way and were about to conquer the rest of small but growing world population to impose their rule over them when God had to use another method to keep them separate. That was to give different races different languages, which ultimately forced humanity to separate. God then worked with the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to teach them His way and set up His model nation, Israel. Where Israel obeyed God's laws, the nation prospered. When they disobeyed, which was most of the time, they suffered, often by being conquered by other nations and having to pay tribute to them. Thus, God's physical model nation, ancient Israel, failed to be the model nation most of the time. But they have still preserved the knowledge of the true God's ways by preserving the Bible through the millennia. Those with the knowledge of God's ways prospered when they obeyed, such as the Jews, but suffered when they didn't. In the end time, over the past 200 years, those who obeyed most of God's laws, such as in the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and the democracies of Northwestern Europe, have prospered, while other nations have not. Thus, God has 3 times deliberately divided humanity to show that obeying His law produces happiness, joy, and abundance, whereas disobeying His law produces pain, suffering, violence, war, and bloodshed. Though God's model nation has not lived up to His standard most of the time and has suffered also, in the end time the results produced by the 2 ways have been dramatic, as demonstrated by the prosperity of the UBI nations and democracies of Northwestern Europe compared with the rest of the world. Now, those were my words in last week's message. I don't know which of my words masqueraders are twisting when they are communicating with African Americans and other non white people to turn them against me and UBI nations. What I have stated is ancient history, but to derive the maximum slander value, masqueraders would not have told such people what I had written in my response to the WhatsApp comment, stating that God has a plan to unite humanity once again as immortal beings, as His sons and daughters, as at the beginning with Adam and Eve, who were created white, but not with a human body, but a spirit body like that of Jesus Christ. That is when humanity, after learning to obey God, will become as immortal beings. Now, instead of paying attention to German masquerader slander, please see my response to the WhatsApp message. God had to separate Cain from Adam's other children because otherwise God's way would not have continued to be taught, and preserved in the line of Seth because of the flood, before the flood. Just as he killed Cain, he would have killed, just as he killed Abel, he would have killed all those who obeyed God. After the flood, God knew that if he did not separate the races, the conditions that led to violence and bloodshed just before the flood would prevail in very little time once more. In fact, that's precisely what Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher were planning, to impose their paganism over all of humanity, and would have killed Noah and Shem had if they had to, because they taught God's way and preserved written records. Even after God forced humanity to separate by giving them different languages, Nimrod tried again to bring all of humanity under his rule. God had to order him to be executed, the very first execution ordered in human history. God has always made sure to preserve the knowledge of his ways throughout man's history. After the flood, that was done through Abraham and his descendants. But just as Seth's descendants went astray and did not obey God fully before the flood, Abraham's descendants, through his grandson Jacob or Israel, have also gone astray after the flood and have not obeyed God fully. Just as Seth's descendants who disobeyed died in the flood, Israelites will suffer punishment because they've disobeyed God. We also know that even though UBI nations have not obeyed God fully, though they have done so more than any other people, they received incredible blessings because of God's unconditional promise to Abraham to bless his descendants in the end time. Genesis 49 calls it latter days, because Abraham was willing to obey God and offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. God fulfilled his unconditional promise to Abraham for more than 200 years, beginning around 1800 AD. He is under no further obligation to continue blessing UBI nations, but will punish them for disobeying his commandments and violating his other laws. In man's history, God prophesied the rise and fall of empires such as the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman empires, and 10 resurrections of the Roman Empire. These were all empires of the Gentiles to show how man's rule over other man is going to be brutal. That's why these empires were pictured by beasts such as a lion, bear, leopard, and another unique beast that represented the Roman Empire. They behaved like brute beasts towards other people. God has set different races rule at God has let different races rule at different times to prove that man's rule over man brings only misery, pain, and suffering. When God sets up his 1,000-year kingdom, then we will be able to compare and contrast the blessings and prosperity God's rule leads to with what we experienced in man's rule over 6,000 years. The Germans have followed Satan, and the world thinks that they have still prospered. But they have not always prospered. Most of the time they have lived in misery, fighting among themselves and other people. The only time they have come together and prospered is when God has prepared them to punish Israel and other people. That's why they have prospered in the last few decades. Once God uses them to punish UBI nations for disobeying his laws, he will punish the Germans with the same brutality they have, and will treat other people as prophesied in Obadiah 1 verse 15, which states, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen," meaning Gentile nations, that is, nations other than Israel. "As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall return upon your own head." But through punishment, Israel will learn the hard lesson that it's much easier and better to obey God diligently and receive his protection and blessings rather than doing what pleases you. That way we will learn the difference between serving God as our king versus serving other kings. Now, what I stated in my message on January 4, 2025 was nothing new. I have stated it many times before. Non-white races originated in the line of Cain as punishment for his ever-multiplying sins. I come from India and our mixed race as is much of humanity. Therefore, what applies to non-white races applies to me also. My ancestors have not known God's ways for millennia and therefore have not been blessed. In the latter days, meaning our times, UBI nations have been blessed because of God's unconditional promise to Abraham. They have not been better than other nations. All are God's children, and He has a plan to make us all His immortal children. Now, my message to non white people and other nations is to focus on what God's plan is for all people and not succumb to German slander. They'll use any lies and slander to divide people. They employ such tactics to use people to achieve their goal of subduing people under their rule. All I have stated is ancient history and what God's purpose was for intervening in human affairs. You may be able to come up with your own explanation of why God intervened the way He did. We should always diligently search for what God's will is for man and in your life and how He wants us to live our lives. Don't be swayed by German propaganda and slander. Again, instead of paying attention to German masqueraders slander, please see my response to the WhatsApp message. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, how Bible prophecy is playing an important role in world affairs, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also follow me on my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini.